Hi guys, Matt Schlicht from ZapChain, and I'm here with Matthew Martin, the CEO of Blossom. Welcome to the Bitcoin course.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we are explaining Bitcoin as simply as possible for all the lovely millions of people who are watching. You can wave to them, it's cool. Because Bitcoin can be kind of complicated to learn in the beginning, and I think we've all gone through that. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about Blossom.
So Blossom is a peer-to-peer investment platform for interest-free financing. We're focused on giving financing options to Muslims which don't accept or borrow with interest. So there's not a lot of financing options out there for people who want to get investment without interest, and that's what we're enabling for small businesses.
Got it. And then does it work with Bitcoin too?
Absolutely. So we see Bitcoin as having a lot of really interesting properties that make what we do a lot easier.
Cool. So how did you get into Bitcoin? Like, Bitcoin was started a little over 5 years ago. Some people got into it a while ago. Some people recently got into it because the price spiked. So when did you get in, and how did that happen?
So I first heard about Bitcoin pretty soon after the paper was originally published. I was working in financial technology at the time at a mobile payments company called Boku. And so we're checking the financial press, right? And Bitcoin kind of came on the financial press as, hey, there's this interesting project people are working on. It was that stage. I think when I first checked the price of Bitcoin, it was around 2.5 cents. Wow. Unfortunately, I didn't just take 3 or 4 paychecks and dump them into Bitcoin.
Or even like $1.
Even $1, right? So it was a while after that before I bought my first Bitcoin. I think I bought my first Bitcoin when it was around $12 to $14. But when I first heard about Bitcoin, I thought, this makes sense. This is really cool. This is the natural digitization of money. So I was pretty jazzed about it.
So were you like confused about Bitcoin? Like, most people, when they hear about Bitcoin, they've probably heard like, oh, Bitcoin is a currency. Maybe I use it to buy illegal drugs, or it's some like magic internet money. Kind of, what was your like reaction at first? So,
my initial reaction was, this is awesome. I really hope the government doesn't just like poo-poo this idea into oblivion.
Right.
So I think the idea of fundamentally, how do you have two people on the internet who don't inherently trust each other, but yet still facilitate a transaction between them without counterparty risk? That's really powerful. And so I was really excited about sort of the blockchain technology in general and how that can be applied.
Right. So blockchain, that's a good point. So the other thing is, a lot of media has covered Bitcoin, and typically when they're doing that, they're talking about Bitcoin as a currency.
Yes.
But that's not actually why you and I and a lot of other people are really excited about it. There's actually this whole other side of Bitcoin, which is blockchain, which is Bitcoin as a protocol.
Exactly.
So what, for everybody watching who's learning about this for the first time maybe, do you want to explain kind of what Bitcoin as a currency is and what Bitcoin as blockchain as a protocol is?
Absolutely. So think about it on the two sides. One, you have a network where you can move value through that network. On the other side, you have the actual token that moves through that network. So similar to how we have a banking system, and that banking system has a network. It's a closed network, so you have to be a bank in the United States to be part of that network, or plug into a bank that's part of that network, and then dollars flow through that system, right? Just numbers in a spreadsheet, essentially. So in the same way, Bitcoin is a network that facilitates the movement of value between people all over the world, but it's an open network. So that means anyone can join this network. You can download the software, install it on your computer, and boom, you're part of the Bitcoin network. On the other side, the token with which you transmit that value on the Bitcoin network is, quote, Bitcoin. So it's both the network that facilitates the movement of that value and also the token that flows through that system.
Right, and so the network would be blockchain.
Exactly. The blockchain technology is the technology that enables people who don't know each other, don't trust each other, to join this open, free-for-all network and have it work perfectly, and have make sure that when I spend Bitcoin, the token, that I actually have the right to spend those tokens, and those aren't your tokens.
I mean, it would be nice if they were my tokens. And
yeah.
I
wish I had more tokens as well.
So what, like, Bitcoin, we've used the dollar, people have used, like, fiat, we have, like, paper money, and we've even gold back in the day. What kind of problems did they have that Bitcoin is now solving?
Yeah, great question. So I think, first it's important to understand some of the fundamental properties of money, right? And some of those properties Bitcoin Bitcoin is very well suited to solve, and others it's not so good, right? And when I say Bitcoin, I'm talking now about Bitcoin the token. So one thing
like the currency.
The currency, Bitcoin the currency, exactly. So one thing Bitcoin does really well is you can divide it into very, very small units. Our currency does that pretty well. Historically, gold and silver have done that pretty well because they're metals and they're easy, they're fungible, right? You can create really small units out of a big hunk of gold.
Right.
I mean, big hunk of gold, right? That's that'd be a lot of gold.
Really big hunk of gold.
Yeah. So you can create very small denominations, sort of out of gold and silver, which is why they're very valuable. The inability to be forged. So you want something that I can't take a rock and spray paint silver over it and say, oh, this is silver, you should accept this as payment, right? And so silver and gold had those properties for thousands and thousands of years. And the Federal Reserve and companies all over the world that print banknotes, they developed their own technology to put holograms and stickers and all sorts of, not stickers, but these cool little logos.
That would be cool though.
That would be cool if it was just a sticker. Now it's money, right?
Yeah.
But that's what they want to avoid, obviously, right? So there's a lot of technology put into physical banknotes in terms of making sure they're not counterfeit. And so the blockchain technology is actually what enables this flow of value between people who don't know each other with a guarantee that it's not counterfeit. And so the way the blockchain technology does that is through what's called a proof of work. So if you're going to go mine silver from the ground, you've actually got to go get silver to extract it from the ground. Right. And Bitcoin uses a somewhat similar concept. So basically, there are people within the Bitcoin network that facilitate these transactions are doing what's called mining. So they're basically solving some really complex math problems. And those math problems aren't free. You have to expend electricity and cycles within your computer to prove that you've done some work. And so by proving that math, you've actually proven that the person who sent those coins is actually the valid owner of those coins. And they get a reward for doing that. And so that's sort of how, in a nutshell, the blockchain technology has solved this problem of how do you make sure people aren't counterfeiting the coins? How can you fundamentally trust someone you don't know?
Right. So how, if I have $1, I could counterfeit it. I guess it would just be kind of difficult to do.
Sure, and people do. There's
possible.
these super notes that flow all over the globe that are indistinguishable from real $100 bills. So counterfeiting is a real problem with physical banknotes.
So how does Bitcoin make sure that I can't, counterfeit or spend my Bitcoins twice?
Yeah, great question. So basically, when you send Bitcoin, your transaction is not just sent to the other person, like, hey, FYI, Matt, I just sent you Bitcoin. It's actually broadcasted across the network. So what that means is your computer and every other computer connected in the system get notified of this event that occurred, that Matt sent Bitcoin to Matthew. And so what happens is each of those points in the network verify that transaction by solving this math problem. And it uses what's called cryptography. And cryptography is what keeps you secure online today. So if you've ever gone to your bank website and you've seen that little HTTPS, that's using cryptography under the hood. That's the way computer scientists solve the problem of how can you make sure that when I go to my bank website, there's not someone in the middle who's listening, who's faking my bank website to get my credentials.
Or even when you log in on Facebook.
Or even when I log in on Facebook, exactly. Or use Google or any other service. Yep. So cryptography is well understood, and it's been in use for quite a while, and that's what keeps us safe online. Bitcoin and the blockchain technology take advantage of cryptography to solve this problem of trust.
So you've been talking a lot about trust as we've been talking, and I think one of the interesting things is that previously, if you and I didn't know each other and we were going to do some sort of transaction, we would need to have some sort of trust between us. I would maybe need to know who you are, but with Bitcoin, that's not necessarily true.
Correct. So it is and it isn't. So I can, with Bitcoin technology, I know that even if I don't trust you, if I receive money from you, the money's mine. If the network has said, yes, Matt sent you Bitcoin, and a certain number of people have verified that, I can trust that. I know the money's now mine to spend. But if I'm selling you a product or you're selling me a product, and I have to pay you in advance, there's still the problem of, are you really going to ship the product after I've sent the money, right? Just like if you go on eBay and you pay money, the money's gone, and now you're trusting the vendor is going to actually send you the goods. So when we talk about trust, we're really talking about the ability to move that value through the system without trusting the people facilitating the transaction or on the other side of the transaction. Now, there's still counterparty risk, just like if you buy something online. If you shop at a store, you have to if a guy in the street comes up and he's like, "Hey, I got an iPhone for $50," and then you buy the iPhone for $50 and the guy walks away and you're like, "Oh, this isn't an iPhone, it's a brick." Right? Like, that's still a problem, right? And
that would be a problem.
That would suck, right?
Don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. So Bitcoin doesn't solve that, but what it does solve is how can I move money? So equate it to like you live on the other side of the country, and I'm basically giving an envelope with cash in it to some guy who's going to drive his car across the country to give you the money. That's crazy. Like, who would do that? Especially if you don't know the guy who's driving the money. Bitcoin actually allows you to do that in a secure way.
So with Bitcoin, what type of opportunities do you think there are for people that are thinking of starting Bitcoin companies right now? Like, where can people innovate with Bitcoin, like, right this moment?
Great question. So, I think fundamentally, like any good entrepreneur should look at problems that exist in the world and figure out how they can solve them. And if Bitcoin happens to be a component of that solution, I think that's awesome. I think there is a little bit of I don't want to say a bubble, but there are a lot of Bitcoin companies who are solving specifically problems around Bitcoin without thinking of the broader picture of what problems worldwide does Bitcoin solve, or what problems as a society in general can Bitcoin solve, of which I think there's a lot. Bitcoin, it's been equated to Bitcoin today as like, the internet in 1997, right? Or the browser in 1997, which I think is a fair comparison. So there's a lot of companies focused already on how do you make the killer app for Bitcoin, the browser? How do you make the browser better to get enough people using the internet, right? The Bitcoin technology. That said, I think there's a lot of the infrastructure that's built up today is built around closed networks, right? Remittance is very based around closed networks. A lot of the payment networks are built around closed networks, right? And so I think, one reason the internet was so successful is not just that it's this technology to move information, but specifically it's a technology that allows anyone to join this network that moves information, right? And Bitcoin has that same disruptive potential. So I think, for example, what we're doing in the peer-to-peer financing world, there are people all over the world who would love to invest in, for example, small businesses, but they can't today because if they wanted to, they'd have to move money to open up a bank account in that country, and they have to know the person. And so one thing I think that's really cool that's emerging is taking sort of Bitcoin V1, like blockchain V1 or whatever, and doing more stuff around sort of how can you make a company where all the people who are members of this company who are financing the company don't actually know each other, never meet each other in person, and don't actually ever set up a bank account. And all the money and rules around the governance of that company is distributed using a technology like the blockchain technology. That to me is really freaking exciting. And I see, over the next 20 years, the institutions we have today, banks and corporations, I think they're going to look a lot different. I don't think we're really going to recognize them in 20 years. So I think there's like the people always talk about like millennials and like, oh, what's a record? What's a VHS? That I think it's going to be that type of thing where in 20 years that generation's going to look at. They're like, oh, there used to be these things called banks that were always physical places you went to deal with money,
which is so strange.
Right. It is, right, when you think about it. And paper, right? So, I think one thing that's exciting to me is disruption in developing markets. I think there's a lot of focus on the developed markets like the United States and Europe, and like people are like, oh, well, we can do things that make paying with Bitcoin much easier and much better. And to me, that's not really all that exciting. Why? Because payments actually work pretty well in the developed world. I have no problems using my credit card, right? I've never been frauded out of money. If I really have a dispute with a merchant, I can call my card company and they'll take care of it for me. Right. I don't pay anything. Now the merchant pays some money. They pay 2.5% to 3% or whatever. But for me as a consumer, that's not a problem. So Bitcoin for me as a consumer is actually not solving a problem for payments. But yet there's a lot of focus on that. However, there's huge emerging markets where credit cards just aren't in use for a variety of reasons. Either the economics don't work out for the card issuers, or people don't want or don't trust credit cards, or whatever the reasons are. And those are the markets where we're going to see the big growth over the next 10 to 20 years. And so I think there's the most exciting opportunities to me in Bitcoin are in emerging markets.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bitcoin has the opportunity to kind of bring everybody in the world up to speed when it comes to finance and banking.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that was interesting that you were talking about was when you were saying that you could have a distributed company where none of the employees know each other and everything's kind of handled by the blockchain.
Yes.
And that's super interesting. Do you think that could happen with governments?
I would love to see it happen with governments. I think this idea that we own the people within this line we drew on a map, and when we own them as assets of our country, it's kind of weird, right? It's a very kind of old school idea. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So I would love to see governments become competitive and be like, hey, anyone who wants to come here, here's what it takes to come here and to become a citizen, and sort of digitize a lot of the services they provide, the governance of the country, things like voting. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities to sort of digitize a lot of the things that countries do not very well today. So I think that's a really exciting idea. So I think one problem is obviously that countries sort of have a monopoly. Like if you happen to be born within these borders, to a large degree, unless you have a lot of capital, there's a lot of countries who are like, oh, if you have a lot of capital, we want to bring that money into the country. Right. So you have more freedom of movement. If you're not born with a lot of capital, or acquire a lot of capital through hard work or whatever, luck or et cetera, your range is sort of limited in terms of your options, in terms of where you want to, what passport you want to have. Right. And so it may seem like pie in the sky now, but people who are building offshore, floating countries, I think that's awesome. And there just should be, in general, I think there should be more competition between countries.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for giving us your insights and helping us with the Bitcoin course.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'm sure this was super educational for everybody watching. Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, man. All right. Bye, guys.